So one of the biggest questions that people ask when getting into shrimp keeping or fish keeping in general is like, how do I lower my pH in my aquarium? Because there's a lot of fish, there's a lot of shrimp out there that like a low pH. And today we're gonna dive deep into it, go over how we lower pH from a multitude of ways using chemicals, botanicals, substrates, so on and so forth. There's a few things you need to know before you even dive into this. So we're gonna go over all that today and give you the basis to lower pH in your aquarium. What is going on, shrimp keepers? This is Rob with flipaquatics.com, and today we are talking about how to lower your pH in your aquarium. Whether that is shrimp related, fish related, snail related, whatever you want to do, we're going to dive into it. And the first thing that you need to understand before diving into this is water parameters and which ones make the most sense. So obviously, if you're worrying about lowering your pH, then you're already familiar with the basic water parameter, pH. And so what actually indicates pH, or like what is the most important parameter for lowering pH? And that is going to be KH. So right here we got a Fritz alkalinity test kit which tests for KH, which is also known as carbonate hardness. Carbonate hardness is basically the buffering capacity of your water. So when you test this, it's really easy to test. There's two colors. There's going to be the base color, which I don't remember what it is, say it's blue. And then you're going to add drops to a 5 milliliter container. This comes with the test tube. You're going to add drops, and then at what part it changes from blue to say yellow, and again, don't quote me on these colors, that is going to be your degree hardness. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, wherever it is. The higher the degree, the harder it will be to influence your pH. And so for us, RO water is going to have a KH of 0 because there's nothing else in it. So we actually remineralize our water and so on and so forth to make sure that we can buffer the water or change the pH of our water. So your first step before you try doing anything I'm going to recommend in this video is understanding where your KH is. The lower your KH is, the easier it's going to be to accomplish this. It's going to be so much. If you have 0 KH in your water, it's going to be really easy. Change your pH and make it lower. If you have a really high KH, you're gonna have to get creative, which we'll show you a couple ways that you could do that to lower your pH. So let's actually dive into, if you know your KH and it's actually high, how can we combat that? So if you guys have a KH that is really high, you need to lower it. You know, if I have a KH of say 10, I want to get that down to at least 5. Otherwise, it's going to be pretty much impossible to alter the pH. The pH is going to be like so high and it's going to want to stay there. It's not going to want to change. So that's where like an RO unit comes into play. I'm not saying go out there and invest in a really expensive RO unit, but if you do have one, you can start with water that has nothing in it, remineralize it. We have plenty of videos on that. Or 2, you can use RO water to cut your KH. So like if you do 50% RO water, 50% tap water, or whatever water you're using, then you would cut your KH reading in half. So if you have 10, you go down to 5. 5 is much more manageable. You can get your number way closer to 7, which 7 is neutral. And so I do recommend this, but do know that you also need to consider, if you're doing this, your GH. So GH is general hardness. It's the same type of test kit as the KH. The only thing with general hardness is you do need to have it in your water. And if you have a low GH already and you're cutting your water in half, that means you're cutting your GH in half, which means that you may have to remineralize with a GH remineralizer. We always recommend Shrimple. It's our product line here at flipaquatics. You guys can definitely check that out if you're worried about remineralizing. We have a really simple guide on how to do that. But this is one way to kind of get your KH down. It would get your GH down as well. And then that would kind of set you up for success as far as altering your pH. So now we can dive into how are we actually going to lower the pH? What are some methods we could use? And again, we're going to be talking about chemicals that we could use. We're going to be talking about botanicals that we could use. And my favorite would be substrate. All these things we're gonna cover here in the next couple minutes, so let's dive into it. If you guys are not subscribed to flipaquatics, come on now, you gotta get subscribed. It's free, doesn't cost you a thing. We want you to be a part of our community here. And if you enjoy these informational videos, definitely join in. We do these every Saturday. Hit the bell notification, you'll be notified. I did also wanna bring this up. I talked about this a little bit, but this is our GH and KH remineralizer. I definitely recommend it if you're looking at altering the chemistry of your water and you need to add a little bit of GH or a little bit of KH. pH. So you can check out all those links down below. And again, thank you guys for watching the video. Let's jump right back into it. So the first part of lowering pH in an aquarium, this is the best example. This is one of our caridina holding totes. We use tap water in this tote, and our tap water comes in at a pH like 8.9, which is way too high. The GH and KH are good, TDS is good. The only thing is, for whatever reason, our pH always tends to be pushing 9, which is not good for any livestock. It's really, really bad. So we want to bring that down, but we want to do it in the least invasive way possible. We don't want to stress the animals out. We don't want to crash it. So we take a very mild approach. So botanicals to me is the number one approach that is slow and steady. It's not going to make a massive difference. It's not going to shock them. The first thing you'll notice about this pond is the color of it. So the color of it is like a tea color, which is due to tannins, which any botanicals that you use that are going to lower the pH are going to add tannins in the water. It's very hard not to do that. And so there's things that you could do. You could add carbon to your tank to get the tannins out. But I actually like the color. I think it's natural. I think it provides you know, a de-stressor for the shrimp or fish, whatever you're using. And so this is kind of our way. Whenever we get it in a fresh import, we have these little mesh bags, and we put about 20 to 30 alder cones in here. Alder cones are my favorite botanical for lowering pH. There's other ones out there. We're going to talk about those. But alder cones are by far my favorite. That's funny. There's actually a baby shrimp that got inside of there, and it's grown up, so I'll have to get him out. But this is what we use, little nylon mesh bags. We just we hang it from our overflow, and it will just alter the pH a little bit. So this tank will end up sitting at about 7.8, 7.6 pH. And again, it's very slow, it's very steady. It won't drop the pH, like it won't have a crash. And so this is a really good option for you. If you have a power filter at home, you could even put the alder cones inside the filter or in the back of the filter in a mesh bag, and it would actually work quicker. I prefer just throwing them on the bottom. They produce a little bit of biofilm, which is good for any type of algae or specifically shrimp. And so these are a really great option, but let's go talk about other options. So my second favorite botanical that's gonna help you lower the pH is definitely gonna be the Indian almond leaves. Now, most leaves will work. Stay away from fruit leaves. They're more of a food type rather than a tannin adding, pH lowering botanical. And so you'll see in this tank, there's really no tannins whatsoever. We only added one leaf. The leaf provides a little bit of biofilm. It breaks down the water, the shrimp eat the organics that break it down. So it's really good for shrimp, especially if you're having like some health issues. So at one point, this tank was having some bacterial issues, so we added the Indian almond leaf for that. We didn't necessarily do it for the pH ability, but leaves will lower the pH. Like you could use oak leaves, things like that. I would definitely use a lot more than one. I'd probably just do leaf matter along the whole bottom. Maybe in a tank this size is 20 gallon long, I would do like 5 or 6, and it might, you know, bring it down slightly. It's definitely not going to bring it down as quick as the alder cones would bring it down, but it is a good alternative if you're just trying to adjust it by like maybe 0.2 or something like that. And so that's the good one. And then the next one that we'll talk about is my least favorite for lowering pH. It does work. It's just a lot slower and it's a lot less predictable. So we'll get into that one right now. So my least favorite botanical for actually altering the pH would be driftwood. There's a lot of different types. And the thing that's so inconsistent about it is like, this piece of driftwood may have been in an aquarium for 2 years. It might have been underwater for 8 years. Like it could have been soaked in salt water. Like you just don't know. And so it's very inconsistent whether it will alter the pH, how much it will alter it. In general, if you take a piece of driftwood that has never been exposed to underwater, it's going to alter the pH. It's just how much will alter it, for how long. Those are the things that are very inconsistent. So driftwood's great if you want to use it anyway. It's great for aquascaping. So I use it in a lot of my personal tanks. We don't really use it in a ton of tanks here at Aquatics just because, you know, shrimp might die and be underneath it and it's really hard to see them. So it's not a natural thing that we use, but the other good thing about this is it does produce biofilm, which is good for shrimp, fish, all the above. It's a great thing to add into your tank. It has hiding places. So it is good. It's the least good for altering your pH. The next thing that I want to talk about is actually my favorite thing for altering pH. It's the most consistent, and it's something that we use here at Flipaquatics regularly. And this is the best thing for lowering your pH that I recommend, but we'll get into that right now. We are currently in our warehouse, and I found this box, and in this box is the best thing for lowering pH. And I really truly mean this. This is what we use here, and I wanted to show you the actual product. Now we don't have bags this big for sale. This is just our personal stock. Rio Escuro. This is the best thing for lowering pH. This is a buffering substrate, otherwise known as an active substrate. This substrate is gonna lower your pH by absorbing the KH out of your water. And this is gonna get your pH anywhere from like 6.5 to like 5. Like, it's always a little bit different for each batch. But this is the most consistent thing that I have found, and this is what we use for all of our caridina shrimp that need a low pH. So I'll actually take you downstairs and we can talk more about it, because, you know, it's kind of scary over here. And so we'll go downstairs, we'll talk about the substrate and why it's so good and how it works, and even how long it lasts, like how often you have to change this out. So let's go take a look at the caridina tanks downstairs. Here are all of our caridina shrimp tanks. We actually have 96 of them. Every single one, except for maybe the exception of like 2 or 3, have the Rio Escuro, which is the black substrate. There's a Rio Cafe, which is pretty much the same thing. It's just brown instead of black. I personally like the black. It's easier to see the shrimp and it's more consistent as far as my understanding and at least my experience. The reason that the substrate, now this substrate is great for a lot of reasons. And I'm not just pitching this because like, hey, we sell it and you know, Brightwell actually sponsors us and Brightwell's the one that makes it. I literally have used this substrate for the past 9 years. Like, this is a great substrate. Couple things about it. One, it will absorb the KH out of your water and it will lower your pH. The more KH you have in your water, the shorter time that this substrate is going to last. It only has so much buffering capacity, which means it can only absorb so much KH before it goes bad. And so if you have like a 5 KH and you use this substrate, it's going to deplete the substrate probably within a year, I would say. I mean, you can kind of watch the pH and gauge how quickly it's being depleted. Once your pH starts creeping above 7, then you know it's time to change it. For us, this substrate, we change it every 2 years. It can last like up to 5 years. Like Chuck, one of our employees here, he's been helping me for forever, and he literally has the same substrate 5 years later and it's still doing great. So it's really good for lowering their pH. It's absolutely essential for caridina shrimp that need a low pH because it provides complete consistency. It holds the pH at a stable level, and it's the most consistent thing we've found. So just using alder cones, botanicals for something that consistently needs a low pH to survive, at least on the shrimp side, it hasn't worked. On the fish side, it could work. I've actually used it on the fish side. It works fine. That's what we do in the fish building. The other great thing about this substrate is it's really good for planted aquariums. Now, that's not the focus of today's video, but it is something to point out that if you wanted a planted aquarium, it's great for that. And most plants do like a pH of less than 7. So it's going to be a win-win for planted aquariums. And it's going to be a win-win for most caridina tanks. So that is the #1, like, best advice I could give for someone that wants a pH of less than 7. If you just want a pH of, you know, let's say we're at 8.9 in the Neocaridina tanks and we just want a pH of like 7.6, 7.8, botanicals is going to be your best friend. This would not work great if you're just trying to lower the pH a little bit and still keep it above 7, but botanicals would. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about is chemicals. This is my least favorite option. It's the option that can cause the most issues. There's a lot of inconsistency, but I'm not going to get into like all these products like pH down and stuff like that. What I'm going to give is the thing that we use and the thing that we found the most success with, and you can use it at your own discretion. I'm not going to encourage you to go do it, but I will share with you what we do, how we do it, and how it works for us. Before we get to the chemical that we use, I did want to ask you guys, this is a secret. We'll get to this in a second, don't worry. Before we do, I'm curious. All of you at home, what is your thing that you have found to be the most effective thing at lowering your pH? Is this an actual issue that you guys are running into? If so, what have you found? Like, have alder cones worked for you? Indian almond leaves, driftwood, substrate? Like, let me know in the comment section. I want to know what you guys actually like doing, because again, I'm always interested in expanding my horizon and seeing what else there is out there. And let's be honest, there's a lot of fish keepers out there that have been in this hobby for 40 years, that have seen a lot of things. And so drop a comment down below where I'm really curious. But let's get into this last little chemical. And again, this is last step. This might, let's go. Now, if you're just trying to lower your pH and you don't really want to use botanicals, you don't like tannins, you don't want to use a substrate because you don't want it super low. This is the only chemical that we use, and it's really not even a chemical. I guess you could consider it a chemical. This is a distilled white vinegar. Now, super potent. You don't want to like overdose it because it could stress out the fish, could stress out the shrimp. We do use this on our caridina shrimp from time to time. We do use it on all of our fish tanks. So this is something that we have a lot of experience with. The only thing about this is it will create like a white film, biofilm type thing because of what this is made of and how it interacts with the water. Like if you ever just add vinegar to a bucket of water and let it sit for 2 weeks, there's gonna be white like bacteria all over the bucket. And that's basically what's gonna happen if your fish aren't eating and stuff like that. So do know that that's the one downfall to using this. Really what I would do is I would start with like a couple drops and see how that alters your pH, do a couple more drops. Another thing is I never like dosing chemicals directly to the aquarium. I always do it in the water change water. So like if you got a 5-gallon bucket, I would do a couple drops, swirl it around real good, test the pH, see where it's at, wait a little bit, do it again, and so on and so forth until you have the pH that you want, and then you could add it to your tank. Again, less is always better. You don't want to shock the animal. So like you go start, doing 2 milliliters into your 20-gallon tank, and then all of a sudden everything dies in your tank. Know that I warned you, don't do that. You want to do slow and steady. This is not something that you want to mess around with. There's a lot of other chemicals out there. There's pH downs, which we've used. And there's a lot of risk involved when you start getting to this point and using chemicals. But this is the one that is the least harsh on the animals. And it's actually very cheap. Like I think this whole bottle is like $3. And this would last you as a fish keeper. If you just got a couple tanks, this would last you years. And so I actually don't know if vinegar lasts years, but yeah, 2027. So it does last years. So it would last you years. And honestly, what I do is I actually measure it out with one of these or an actual like milliliter syringe. And then, in a tank this size, which is like 200 some gallons, I would do like 1 milliliter. I personally would do it directly to the tank because I know I'm doing it in such a low volume. And then I would test the pH the next day. And if it's still too high, I would do another milliliter, and I would just keep working it down. In a tank smaller than this, like our 20-gallon fish tanks, we always do it with the water change water, get the water where we want it, and then do water changes with that water. So you at home, I would never add it directly to your tank. I would always do it with the water change water and bring it down over time. So this is the only chemical that I would recommend using, but I still would say proceed with caution. Don't just dive into it. You guys, I'm telling you, it's risky business. And so that's the chemical that I would say that you would use. Now, again, just to recap, the most important thing that you need to know is what your water currently is. You need to test the KH and understand where that is. The higher that is, the more tough it is going to be to adjust your water parameters. Next thing is cutting your water parameters if your KH is too high. But if you're going to do that, you need to know where your GH is. You want to make sure your GH is not going to be too low then, and then potentially remineralize from there. Botanicals are my best friend. I love them. I think they're great for shrimp. You can use alder cones. You can use certain type of hardwood leaves. Indian almond leaves is what we use. Next thing is driftwood. Again, the least consistent of the botanicals. So that would be my last option. Next thing is if you want a pH below 7, substrate, buffered substrate, specifically Rios Grow by Brightwell, is going to be your best friend. Literally your best friend. Now, if you're just trying to avoid tannins and you don't really want to get a pH less than 7, that's where distilled white vinegar comes into play. You could experiment with like a pH down. I don't recommend it, but you could if you want to. I can't stop you. I'm just here to educate you. And that is how you lower pH in your fish tank. Guys, thank you so much for being a part of this Shrimp Saturday. We appreciate your support. As always, God bless. Catch you on the flip side.